photographer, and how did you become a music photographer?
I was interested in the music first. So I liked a lot of bands. When I left, I liked listening to a lot of music, and then when I left school, I went to see various bands like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones.
Allora, è un ragazzo fortunato perché era già interessato alla musica da tempo e quando ha cominciato a interessarsi alla musica ascoltava un sacco di band e ha avuto l'occasione di vedere i Beatles, i Rolling Stones, i Led Zeppelin, insomma il meglio della musica rock inglese di quel tempo.
And then a friend suggested that I go and see David Bowie, and this was Ziggy Stardust. So I went to this show, and I just expected a normal rock show, but it turned out to be theatre and mime, and I'd never experienced anything like it. So that changed everything.
Allora, fin quando un amico non gli ha consigliato di andare a vedere David Bowie, lui si aspettava di vedere un concerto normale e invece ha visto che dentro c'era teatro, mimo, musica, tante altre cose, non era uno show normale e questo ha cambiato tutto nella sua percezione della musica.
So that changed everything, and I decided I wanted to capture this, photograph it, which I'd also thought about Jimmy Page with Led Zeppelin, but when I saw David Bowie, that really changed everything. And at the show that I was at, which is the day before he retired, Ziggy Stardust, Kate Bush was there as well. So there were a lot of people who later went on to make their own music, and Kate Bush is a bit of a female David Bowie.
Yes.
So, and also her live show was very creative and theatrical, so I think a lot of that came from him.
Allora, era già capitato di vivere questa sensazione di cambiamento vedendo Jimmy Page con i Led Zeppelin, ma Bowie era un'altra cosa, soprattutto perché lui ha avuto l'occasione di vedere lo spettacolo il giorno prima dell'ultimo show di Ziggy Stardust. Ha detto quella sera con lui c'era anche Kate Bush e non a caso anche lei è diventata un'artista che ha molto allargato il campo di intervento teatrale, quindi di immagine attorno alla musica.
So then
ha deciso che voleva catturare quello che aveva visto, quindi fermare in qualche modo quello che aveva visto.
Sì. So then
speak a very good Italian.
So the next year, I was still young, working in a newspaper shop on Saturdays, and some girls came into the shop and they were giggling and they wanted pen and paper, and I asked them what was happening, and David was recording it was a very famous recording studio, but in a very quiet place, very quiet. Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and everyone did all their albums in there, so it was very prestigious. Sorry?
Trident Studios.
No, Olympic it's called. And the Who did all their albums there. Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix did 2 of his albums. It was a really big place. Anyway, so David Bowie was in there recording Diamond Dogs. So I went home and got my £5 camera, came back and waited for him, and then took some pictures as he arrived. So and this was just, I suppose, I just wanted to photograph him off stage. And then then straight after that same year, I did a trip around Europe on Interrail, and I became completely hooked on travel. So I realised what I really wanted to do was photograph music and travel.
Allora, l'aneddoto completo è questo, che un anno dopo il concerto di Bowie lui lavorava in un negozio di giornali, un newspaper shop, vicino a uno studio di registrazione dove sono passati tutti i più grandi, ci hanno lavorato i Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, gli Who, insomma un sacco di artisti, e stava registrando David Bowie. Sono entrate nel negozio delle ragazzine che chiedevano carta e penna perché volevano appunto andare fuori dallo studio, incontrare Bowie e farsi fare gli autografi. Lui allora decise di uscire con la sua macchina fotografica da 5 pound e andare a scattare le foto a Bowie. Nello stesso anno fece un grande e lungo giro d'Europa con l'Interrail e fu molto appassionato all'idea di viaggiare, quindi decise di mettere insieme tutto, quindi la musica, la passione per la fotografia e quella per il viaggio, e di diventare quindi quello che è diventato. So this was the start, but who was apart from Bowie, the very first musician that you choose to photograph? Scusate, questo è stato l'inizio, ma qual è stato il primo musicista che lui ha scelto di fotografare?
Well, it happened a bit strangely because the next year, punk happened in London. So it was very difficult to photograph big bands. So when punk came along, it was suddenly very easy. And also these were the people that the music press wanted photographs of. So you could just pay less than £1 or whatever, and you got to see the Clash or whoever it was. So all these pictures got published, and then my name was under them, and so then I became known in the music business.
Allora è successo che un anno dopo è esploso il punk e mentre era molto difficile andare a fotografare le grandi band, i grandi personaggi, al contrario, andare a fotografare i gruppi punk era molto facile, i prezzi dei biglietti erano una sterlina, si poteva arrivare quindi a fotografare tutti, i Clash e tutti gli altri che lui ha visto, ma soprattutto i giornali in quel momento volevano le foto dei gruppi punk, per cui tutte le foto che lui scattava sono state pubblicate, sotto c'era il suo nome ed è diventato famoso quindi in questo modo. So, I have a very curious question. What music did you like at the time? The punk or the big band music? Quale musica amava di più? Il nuovo punk o la musica dei Led Zeppelin, dei Beatles?
Yeah, it's kind of an easy answer, really. And it wasn't punk. So I love the Beatles music. I love a lot of those rock bands, and I'd grown up looking at the Rolling Stones. They were the big band, and so these were the kind of people that I wanted to work with now. But the punk bands, the thing about them was they were very exciting, a lot of them. And also they were inspiring the people who went to see them. So there was one famous show by the Ramones. And again, a bit like me and with David Bowie, in the audience were the future Sex Pistols, Clash, all those bands. But they didn't have a band at that point. But they saw the Ramones and thought, we can do that. And that's how that began.
Allora, detto, la musica che lui amava era chiaramente la musica del passato, non il punk, amava i Beatles, amava quindi le grandi band con cui era cresciuto, però il fenomeno che viveva in quel momento era fantastico perché così come veniva stimolato lui a scattare fotografie, a scegliere quella musica, così accadeva ai ragazzi che vedevano i concerti, e cita il famosissimo concerto dei Ramones a Londra, per cui molti dei ragazzi che erano tra il pubblico poi sono diventati i Sex Pistols, i Clash e molti altri, così come lui è diventato fotografo. Adesso, now, the Queen was something that was in between, because it was at the beginning of the 70s, 72, 73, then the punk went on and they never went out. So it was one of the few bands like Bowie or a few others that weren't cancelled by the punk and the new wave. So how do you begin to be in relation with them?
Well, they weren't...
Scusate, non ho tradotto. Allora, i Queen sono stati in mezzo, hanno cominciato attorno al 73-74, ma non sono stati travolti e cancellati dal punk. Sono una delle poche band che rispetto alla grande ondata del punk ha resistito. Quindi lui era in questo momento dei Queen, e cos'è che ha spinto lui ad entrare in relazione con i Queen?
Queen weren't intimidated by this, whereas I mean, the punks called the older bands old farts. And of course, but people like Led Zeppelin, they were 30. They were really still young. And, but I'm the same age as the punks, and so we were all sort of 21. So they were really old to us. But the thing with punk, some of the punk bands, they became bigger, like the Jam and the Clash. So they progressed. But what I wanted to do really was go on tour, as you know. So I was still going to see the bands that I liked. So I went to see Mott the Hoople, who were supported by Queen. But Queen were unknown, really. They'd had one album that hadn't really sold much. And this guy comes on as though he owns the whole place. And he's in the support band. And so I said to my friend, who does that guy think he is? He knew who he was. He was Freddie Mercury. So so that was the first time I saw them, and then the next time was the show where I took the first photograph that I sold, and there's quite a funny story there because Queen were managed by Elton John's manager, and John Reid, and I went into Queen's office, which was John Reid's office, to see if they wanted to buy any of these pictures. So I got lost in the building, and I opened one door to ask directions, and it was Elton John sitting at the desk. So I thought, well, I'm here now, so I'll ask him directions, and carried on. And that's when they bought. So that was the first picture then that I sold, and then that's when things slightly began to change.
Allora, la prima volta che li ho visti era un tour dei Mott the Hoople, band che come sapete è legata peraltro a David Bowie, e i Queen facevano da supporto, avevano già pubblicato un album ma non aveva avuto un grandissimo successo, e invece la band di supporto quella sera dominò la serata, e lui chiese al suo amico: ma chi diamine crede di essere questo Freddie Mercury che riesce a fare una roba del genere? Per cui andò chiaramente a fotografarli per la prima volta ufficialmente nel concerto successivo, e portò queste foto all'ufficio dei Queen per venderle. Il manager dei Queen era John Reed, lo stesso di Elton John, per cui racconta l'aneddoto, è carino. Lui è nel palazzo, si perde nel palazzo, non sa dove deve andare, a un certo punto apre una porta e c'è Elton John seduto alla scrivania, e lui pensa: adesso chiedo a lui dove diamine devo andare. Ma insomma, alla fine riuscì a vendere le foto ai Queen, e diventò quindi anche quella una svolta importante della sua carriera. When you felt to have become a rock photographer? With this selling of the photo to the Queen, or in other case? Quando ha sentito di essere diventato un fotografo rock?
Well, I still had a job in an office, you see, so I wasn't a rock photographer, but I was going to say I carried on seeing bands, but I forgot the relevance there. But what happened then was at my very, very first punk show, and this was 1976, and it was The Damned, and it was their second ever performance, so it was very early on. I met a photographer there, and he changed my life in a way as well, because I had no flash gun, because I hate them. So I arrived, and I'd seen bigger concerts where they had big light shows, and of course the Damned are playing in a college. There are almost no lights, so I couldn't really take any pictures. So I told this photographer I'd left my flash gun at home, could I borrow his? So he's the one who said, I really don't like this punk stuff. You send your pictures into NME, which was the biggest music paper. So that's how that began. But he was also sharing a house with Phil Lynott, the singer of Thin Lizzy. So his name was Chalky. So I would go round to the house and visit them. And then Phil Lynott said one day, we're going to tour in Scandinavia. So I just said, take me along. So he said, okay. And that was that was how I first went on tour. And then I worked with Thin Lizzy all the way through.
Vedete che la vita un tempo forse era anche più facile. Allora, Denis dice che il momento in cui tutto è cambiato realmente è stato quando è andato a vedere il secondo concerto dei Damned dal vivo. La band era chiaramente una band punk, lui era abituato, amava fotografare senza il flash, perché non gli piace fotografare col flash, non gli piaceva, però fotografando le grandi band che avevano grandi impianti luci il problema era abbastanza limitato. Invece i Damned chiaramente era una band punk, poca, le luci erano poche, le fotografie che scattavano sarebbero state inutili, quindi ha chiesto a un fotografo che era accanto se gli poteva prestare il flash per scattare le foto. Lui non solo l'ha prestato, ma gli ha detto anche: guarda, puoi vendere le tue foto a Division Restaurant, NME, e queste foto in qualche modo sono state le prime che mi hanno fatto capire che il mercato, cioè che era arrivato ad avere un mestiere, cioè che aveva un ruolo vero e proprio, e che quindi questa cosa in qualche modo l'ha cambiata. Ma non solo. Il passaggio seguente, per dire che le cose capitano, questo fotografo divideva l'appartamento con Phil Lynott, il cantante dei Thin Lizzy. Lui va a trovare il fotografo, conosce Phil Lynott a un certo punto dice che loro stanno per andare in tour in Scandinavia. Yes, quindi e Dennis gli chiede: posso venire con voi? E Phil Lynott gli dice: certo, vieni. E quindi lui parte e segue il tour dei Thin Lizzy, che chiaramente trasforma ancora una volta. You are a very lucky guy. I mean, sort of.
Sometimes you've got to ask the right questions at the right. Well, I knew what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was tour with David Bowie, Queen, and the Rolling Stones, and I toured with them all. Yeah. So it's because I knew what I wanted to do and who I wanted to do it with. So if anything ever happened, I chose that moment to take that next step. So with who should I start with? Well, I went London is a very difficult place for photography rock bands because there are too many bands appearing, and there are too many photographers. And it's the same in New York and Los Angeles. Those three cities are really, really busy. So I decided I'd go away out of London and go to Scandinavia, to America, other parts of America, to photograph bands and get with less competition. So a very quick story, but it's a long story. So, but I'll tell the quick one. So I went to see the Rolling Stones in Detroit, and I walked into this indoor arena, and the indoor arena was 80,000 people. So I'd never really seen anything like this. Anyway, I was with some friends and they'd got passes. So this woman came out with all the photographers, and she had her headset on. And I just ducked into the line with the other photographers and started walking into the photo bit. And then she went out. So that was that. But then the Rolling Stones were going to tour Europe. So the next year, I was shooting for a German magazine, and they wanted me to shoot the Rolling Stones, who were playing in Scotland. So I was sitting in the airport lounge, and there was the woman who'd thrown me out. So she said, "I remember you." And I went, "How?" And she said, "Well, when I threw you out, you were so polite." So this was another life-changing thing, although you never know at the time. So then I was photographing, the Stones played the 100 Club in London, which is 300 people, tiny. And then they started a big tour. And I was going to do 3 songs, which is what photographers are allowed to do, at the first show at Feyenoord Stadium, 80,000 people, whatever. So I get to my hotel room and I have to phone up the PR. And guess who? So I phone up and it's her. So I said, "I've been promised more than 3 songs." She said, "Well, I don't know anything about it." And then someone's turned on the air conditioning. And she said, "You know there are 75 photographers here tonight." So I said, "Who's the official photographer?" And she said, "We don't have one." So I said, "I'll do it." So she said, "Well, I couldn't ask you, but because you've asked me, I can take it to the band." And so she went down. She said, "I'm going to go to the band and see what they say," which were probably the best words I'd ever heard up till that point. This is the world's biggest band. So she came back and she said, "You can shoot tonight for us. I'll take you down to meet the band and everything else." I actually thought I was dreaming. Went down, shot the show. One of my cameras broke, obviously. And then I ended up shooting 8 weeks. And that's again because on the plane, Mick Jagger came down, said, "It's time for you to go." It was actually, he mentioned it, but it was the same girl, Alvinia. She came and said, "Mick says it's time to go." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, he wants different photographers, so he gets a different viewpoint," which I thought was a really good idea, but obviously didn't agree. And I said, "Well, he hasn't looked at the pictures." Keith Richards had looked at the pictures, oddly enough, and he was more interested, and Mick didn't seem to care. So I said, "Well, can I stay on the tour? So why get rid of me? Can I stay on the tour?" So he said, "You can stay until London," which was 4 weeks, and then in London I extended it to the whole 8 weeks. So it was bit by bit by bit.
Allora, questa è molto lunga, per cui qualcosa me la perderò, perdonate, non prendo appunti. Partiamo dall'inizio, lui ha detto non è fortuna, cioè c'è chiaramente una quota di fortuna perché devi essere nel momento giusto al posto giusto, però lui sapeva esattamente quello che voleva fare, lui aveva l'obiettivo di fotografare nella vita i Rolling Stones, David Bowie e i Queen e li ha fotografati alla fine tutti e 3, è andato in tour con tutti e 3, quindi la determinazione e la volontà sono fondamentali. Lui ha detto io sapevo esattamente quello che volevo e quindi ho fatto in modo anche che le cose accadessero perché quello volevo fare e quello quindi era il mio obiettivo, se ne avessi avuto altri non sarei arrivato dove sono arrivato. Poi l'aneddoto degli Stones è molto lungo ma molto bello perché lui ha deciso, ha detto dato che a Londra la concorrenza dei fotografi era molto alta, ce n'erano tantissimi, la verità, in ogni evento ci sono un sacco di fotografi, un sacco di band, quindi c'è concorrenza in tutti i casi. Lui ha deciso di cominciare a lavorare nelle città laterali, quindi di seguire i tour in posti diversi che non fossero Londra. Va a Detroit a seguire i Rolling Stones, vede a un certo punto l'addetta stampa che guida, come dire, il gruppo dei fotografi per andare sotto al palco a fare le foto e lui si accoda facendo finta di essere uno dei fotografi. Chiaramente la detta stampa se ne accorge e gli dice: tu devi andare via, you go out. Lui va, esce, non fa le foto, ma si ripresenta all'appuntamento seguente, dove la detta stampa lo riconosce e ti dice: beh, io mi ricordo di te mesi fa, eri a Detroit e ti ho cacciato via, e a questa cosa, ma gli dice: sei stato molto gentile, sei stato molto educato, ho apprezzato il tuo atteggiamento, vieni questa volta, puoi fare le foto. Quindi all'occasione di fare le foto in un'occasione speciale, avrei voluto esserci anch'io, lo confesso, i Rolling Stones sono al 100 Club, è un posto molto piccolo, ospiterà forse 300 persone in tutto. Io ho avuto la fortuna di vederci i Sex Pistols, so I was lucky enough to see the Sex Pistols at 100 Club.
I never saw them.
Yeah, I did. Ma fare foto lì, trovo ancora, come dire, segue gli Stones e a un certo punto, parlando, visto che continuo ad avere un buon rapporto con questa addetta stampa che nel frattempo fa carriera nell'entourage della band e quindi dirige pian piano la comunicazione, riesce a partire con loro in tour. Gli dicono: però puoi fare solo le prime 3 canzoni, come succede normalmente nella gran parte degli spettacoli. Lui fa queste canzoni, ma chiaramente gli chiede di poter fare dell'altro e lui dice: non posso decidere io, se tu vuoi venire con noi ce la decidono Mick e Kit. Quindi fa vedere le foto a Mick Jagger, che reagisce ma non in maniera travolgente, e quindi lei gli dice: guarda, devi andare via. No, vede le foto anche a Keith Richards piacciono di più le foto, quindi decidono i 2 Rolling Stones che lui può seguire il tour, e gli dice: va bene, solo 4 settimane fino a Londra, ma lui continua, gli fa vedere le foto e quindi alla fine li segue per 8 settimane e diventa in qualche modo, perché chiama di nuovo questa signora e dice: guarda, ma avete un fotografo ufficiale? E lei gli dice: no, non abbiamo un fotografo ufficiale. E lui dice: posso essere io il vostro fotografo ufficiale. Quindi parla di nuovo con Mick Kit, diventa il fotografo ufficiale del tour dei Rolling Stones. Quindi è vero, alla fine bisogna essere abbastanza sfrontati e sicuri nel sapere quello che si vuole fare per potersi candidare, but not only determination and fortune, but also you were good at doing photos, I suppose. Maybe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. But also, all the way through this, in London, every time they appeared in London, I photographed Queen, because I love shooting them. So they did all sorts of shows and tours, and then just before that Rolling Stones tour, I went to Scandinavia to shoot Queen, and then when they saw the pictures, they asked me to photograph their football stadium tour that they were doing that year. So I did that as well. So I was starting to work more with Queen now too. So then, this was 1982. Then in 1982 there was a tour accountant on the tour, looked after all the money, and he and I just told jokes and laughed all the way through the tour. So the next year I read in Billboard that he's putting together a big tour that year. He decided he was going to make a lot more money, and he worked with an agent, so they had the accountant and the agent, and it was David Bowie. So Serious Moonlight Tour. So I said, I did my usual, phoned him up and said, I want to do the tour. So he said, well, you know, David, I can't go and say, here's someone you've never heard of. So he said, you have to have a business plan. So I said, well, what we'll do is I'll go on the tour, you pay for everything, I'll do a book, and then you can take all the costs back from the book. So that's what we did. So I spent the whole year with David Bowie. So.
Allora, la vita leggendaria di Denis O'Regan. Quindi nel frattempo, mentre seguiva i tour dei Rolling Stones, aveva cominciato a fotografare i Queen tutte le volte che venivano a Londra, perché chiaramente il soggetto gli piaceva moltissimo fotografare Freddie Mercury. A un certo punto va in Scandinavia, li segue, Scandinavia, avete pronunciato all'inglese, ormai è così, e comincia ad avere quindi un rapporto sempre più fitto con i Queen. L'accountant, quello che cura le economie dei tour, allo stesso tempo che aveva fatto i tour dei Queen fino al primo grande tour negli stadi che lui ha seguito, voleva fare un salto di qualità maggiore e quindi diventa insieme a un altro manager il promoter del nuovo tour. Lui legge su Billboard che questo, con cui lui aveva avuto un buon rapporto d'amicizia, ridevano, scherzavano, insomma, quindi aveva una relazione, che avrebbe organizzato il tour di David Bowie. Stiamo parlando del Serious Moonlight Tour 83, se non vado errato, 83. Yes. E chiaramente cosa fa? Come ha fatto le altre volte, alza il telefono, chiama questo e dice: voglio essere il fotografo ufficiale del tour. Giustamente lui risponde: guarda, devo chiedere a David, ma devi considerare che lui non sa manco chi sei, quindi che non ha la più pallida idea di quello che tu faccia, ma al contrario, come al solito, obiettivamente per l'abilità di Dennis non solo di fotografare ma anche di presentarsi e di entrare in relazione, diventò il fotografo ufficiale del Serious Moonlight. I saw the Serious Moonlight touring at Fréjus in France.
Yeah.
A great concert.
The next day then we flew to California to do one huge show which was put on by the founders of Apple.
Yes, it
was called the US Festival.
Yes, the US Festival.
Yeah. And David was being paid $1.5 million. So this is in 1983. So, but with that money, he would buy another stage. So it meant they could do more shows in Europe. So we went from Fréjus to San Bernardino, and then back again the next day. It was quite difficult. So, but it was.
Aspetta che questa la traduco perché è molto carina. Io gli ho detto: ho visto il tour, il Serious Moonlight Tour nell'83 al Fréjus, tour bellissimo di Bowie. Lui ha detto: sì, noi il giorno dopo siamo partiti per l'America perché siamo andati a Los Angeles, per la precisione a San Bernardino, perché il cofondatore della Apple, Steve Wozniak, aveva organizzato un grande festival rock che era lo US Festival con i suoi soldi, cioè era diventato il produttore di questo festival. Bowie fu pagato $1,5 milioni per il concerto e con quei soldi comprò un palco più grande e migliore per tornare in Europa a fare altri concerti del Serious Moonlight.
So the next, so I did that huge tour and that was amazing. I decided I was a rock photographer by this time.
Lui a questo punto ha deciso che era un fotografo rock.
So, but when I was photographing punk, and I would go and shoot the Ramones, and then I'd go back to my parents' house and I'd develop the films in the bathroom and dry the negatives with a hairdryer, and then I'd do a print, then dry the print with a hairdryer, then go into the office where I was working and then take those prints into NME, the music paper. The next day, John Taylor and Nick Rhodes, who then went on to form Duran Duran, would look at those pictures in NME on the bus going to school. So there was a story that went through Bowie and then through Duran Duran and punk Bowie, Duran Duran. So the next year, I went on tour with Duran Duran and did their biggest tour, which was this giant tour of America. Yes, when they became huge.
Allora, altro aneddoto delizioso, lui era al concerto dei Ramones che abbiamo citato prima, fa le foto dei Ramones, ma a casa racconta, come dire, una roba tecnica, cioè prendere, sviluppare i negativi, asciugarli, quindi stampare, asciugare ancora sempre col phon le foto, quindi portarle al New Musical Express, escono e quelle foto vengono viste da John Taylor e dei Duran Duran, che anziché non erano ancora i Duran Duran, they went to school, they weren't the Duran Duran. Yes. Vedono quelle foto. Curioso è che poi lui seguirà l'anno dopo il tour dei Duran Duran e c'è questo curioso link nella sua vita tra David Bowie e i Duran Duran e tutta questa grande genia di musica inglese. Now, to make photograph to Freddie Mercury was different than the others. Why? Allora, fare foto a Freddie Mercury è diverso che fotografare gli altri. Perché?
Well, he was the best performer that I ever saw.
Better than Mick Jagger?
Yeah. He can control. Mick Jagger performs mainly to the audience, but Freddie Mercury owned the audience, so they were his for that whole show. And I mean, it was illustrated best of all at Live Aid because when the tickets were sold for Live Aid, no one knew who was playing. So it wasn't a stadium full of Queen fans, obviously. It was a stadium full of people who liked all sorts of music. But when Freddie came on stage, the whole stadium became a Queen audience. And that's, I think, what was so amazing about him. And the band and the music. I mean, all of the band members wrote the songs. It wasn't just Freddie. But he was the performer, he played the piano, etc. He is easily the best performer I've ever seen.
Allora, perché era diverso? Perché era probabilmente il miglior performer che ci sia mai stato. Gli ho chiesto se era meglio anche di Mick Jagger e ho detto sì, perché alla fine Mick Jagger suona per il pubblico, mentre invece Freddie Mercury possedeva il pubblico. Sul palco il pubblico diventava il suo e basta. E l'esempio più classico è quello di Live Aid. Ha detto, quando sono stati messi in vendita i biglietti per il Live Aid, nessuno sapeva il cast, quindi si compravano i biglietti in generale, non erano i fan dei Queen ad aver comprato i biglietti per Live Aid. E invece quando Freddie e la band sono saliti sul palco è diventato tutto pubblico dei Queen, sono diventati una comunità di pubblico dei Queen, non era previsto che lo fosse. E lui dice, questo è merito ovviamente della band, della musica, delle canzoni. Peraltro scrivevano tutti e quattro, non soltanto Freddie, ma il performer era lui, quindi era lui in scena, era lui che suonava il piano, era lui che occupava il palco e in un modo o nell'altro catalizzava l'attenzione di tutti quanti. Please, I'll do the question. Allora, i Queen hanno avuto un apice della carriera, cioè momenti altalenanti, hanno avuto momenti di down, momenti nuovamente di high, come appunto il Live Aid che abbiamo detto, e poi concerto lo ero anch'io, il trionfo del 1986 a Wembley, che è probabilmente la cosa più grossa europea che loro hanno mai fatto. Hai vissuto anche questa altalena, cioè hai sentito che i Queen andavano giù e su nella loro carriera. So Queen has a career that went up and down, was not so linear, and they had many ups, many downs, but then there was the highest, the 86 Wembley show where I was. And did you felt the up and downs doing the photograph?
Well, not during photography, but I saw the ups and downs of people's careers. David Bowie, when he had a heart attack and then retired effectively, then suddenly he started to become bigger and bigger and bigger, because no one could see him. Whereas in the early 90s, he was doing shows that he should never have done because he was just not popular, really. And he was easy to see. And then he became more of an enigma later on, and that developed, and the same with Freddie after he died. But I wouldn't see I did with Duran Duran because I worked with them over a very long period. So I started with them really on their biggest tour. Then they kind of broke up. And then they came back and they were never as big again. And now they're huge again, and it's all 80,000 in London. I know. And the Rolling Stones, the tour that I did was 1982. The previous tour was 1976, so that was 6 years. They did the next tour after the one in 82 was another 8 years. So they only did one tour in 14 years in Europe, and that was the one I did. And of course, they then they had broken up, really. They didn't want to see each other. They went off and did solo tours. But Mick Jagger thought because he was Mick Jagger and he was the singer of the Rolling Stones, he would be just as big as the Rolling Stones. Yeah, I mean, no one was interested. So he had to kind of change his attitude and come back. Without Keith Richards,
it was different to photograph them when they weren't down or not. I mean, did you feel something different?
Well, no, they were huge on the one that I did. So what had happened in '76, they hadn't played, so they didn't play until 1981 in America, which is when I went there and got thrown out. And then they played, and that was a giant tour. It was the biggest tour ever. Yeah. So then the next year when I did them in Europe, that was the biggest European tour ever. So they were big then, but they then disappeared, and everyone thought they were finished, and then they came back and they were bigger again. But there was that huge gap when it could have gone either way. But when you're on a tour, you see the inside of it all. So you know what's really going on. And whether the artist is happy with the tour or pleased about the tour. And when there are problems at certain points, who the audience obviously would never know. There was Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are like husband and wife, you know. So they argue, and there was one show when I was just photographing Mick Jagger, and I saw Ronnie Wood ran up to Mick Jagger and whispered, and I could see people saying something. Okay. So the next day I asked him what happened, and he said, well, Keith had come up to me before the show and was looking for Mick, and he wasn't happy. He was really angry. Then everyone goes on stage, and Keith decided he would make life difficult for Mick. So again, it's 80,000 people, whatever. So Keith went down to the front, down onto a long catwalk, and sat at the end of it, and just played a guitar solo, on and on and on. And Mick couldn't do anything except stand there doing this, and he had nothing to sing. So Ronnie went down, and he was about to ask Keith what was going on. And before he could say anything, this is in the middle of a song, playing away, he turned around and said, "Did he send you down here?" And before Ronnie Wood could say anything, he said, "Well, because if he did, you can go back and tell him to fuck off." So Ronnie Wood runs back to Mick Jagger and says, "He told you to fuck off," you know. And it's all in the middle of a song in front of 80,000 people. So those and the audience probably didn't notice any of it.
Allora, è vero che lui ha detto ho seguito gli alti e bassi, non sempre, perché ad esempio i tour degli Stones lui li ha vissuti sempre, essendo a distanza di 8 anni, loro per dire in 14 anni hanno fatto un solo tour europeo, erano sempre alti, quindi, però la tensione tra di loro era fortissima. Ha seguito i Duran Duran sia quando erano come dire, all'apice del successo, i primi concerti che ha seguito, poi praticamente si sono sciolti, poi sono tornati. L'altro giorno hanno fatto quasi 80.000 persone del parco, quindi sono ampiamente tornati, forse anche con successo più grande degli anni Ottanta, ma ha detto le cose che vedo io, chiaramente seguendo i tour, la gente non le vede, e l'aneddoto che racconta è bellissimo. Concerto degli Stones, Keith Richards particolarmente arrabbiato, lui lo vede prima perché ci parla, proprio Richards fuori di sé. A un certo punto, nel bel mezzo di una canzone, Keith Richards si fa tutto il catwalk, va avanti, si siede e attacca un assolo che non finisce mai. Nel mezzo di una canzone, cioè continua a suonare, e Jagger non sa che fare, ovviamente, se non muoversi alla sua maniera al tempo. E lui continua a suonare. A un certo punto Ron Wood, per capire cosa diamine sta succedendo, si avvicina a Keith Richards, che continua l'assolo, e prima di poter dire una sola parola, perché voleva chiedergli cosa cavolo dovevano fare, Richards gli dice: guarda, se ti ha mandato Mick Jagger puoi tornare indietro e dirgli di andare a fanculo. Allora lui timidamente torna indietro, va da Mick Jagger e dice: guarda, ha detto che te ne puoi andare a fanculo, e questa è la situazione. Allora è chiaro che queste robe noi non le avvertiamo, per noi era solo sicuramente un fantastico assolo di Keith Richards improvvisato nel mezzo di una canzone, ma un fotografo come lui, che quindi li segue, può vedere le cose, ha vissuto cose che noi umani ovviamente non abbiamo potuto vedere. It was like that also with Queen, or the relationship between them was different?
No, they got on really, really well. They were really good. I mean, they are, yeah, but everyone argues. You know, they're together a lot, but they were obviously really fond of each other. And the good thing is, compared to some groups, they all wrote the songs, they all played instruments, so no one felt as though it was one famous person and the rest of them are not doing anything, which it was the impression with the Stones, for instance, and some other bands. So The Who had the same issues. One is the songwriter and one's the singer. But then the next year after, I toured with Duran. Well, in 1985 I toured with Duran, Neil Diamond, the Bee Gees and Spandau Ballet. So it was a bit of a different year. And then the following year was the Queen tour. I was going to say Queen's last tour, but it wasn't. You know, everyone thought it was just the next tour. So again, I said, I think I should do this one, so I did. And then the next year was David Bowie tour, and I did that again. And then by this time I was a bit, you know, bored. I'd done it was now the same thing. Yeah. It was the same plane, sometimes, or the same hotels. You bump into the same people. So I got, a little bit, but it was an amazing 10 years, really.
Allora, ho detto, sono stati 10 anni comunque fantastici, perché la verità è che I Queen, ad esempio, non erano così avversi come i Rolling Stones, né lo stesso tipo di problemi che avevano gli U, perché uno era l'autore e l'altro il cantante. I Queen suonavano tutti e quattro, erano autori tutti e quattro e sono stati amici realmente, anche con i loro alti e bassi ovviamente, ma sicuramente lo sono ancora, hanno un rapporto tra di loro molto forte. Questo li ha aiutati a essere diversi dalle altre band e arrivare fino alla fine, bene o male, tutti insieme. Lui ha detto, il rapporto con i Queen è stato con i vari tour, nel frattempo ha seguito Neil Diamond, i Bee Gees, gli Spandau Ballet, ancora i Duran Duran, insomma ha avuto altri tour con loro finché a un certo punto, i Rolling Stones, finché a un certo punto è diventato anche tutto un po' abbastanza noioso, perché comunque stessi concerti, stessi set, stesse canzoni, incontri la stessa gente, il lavoro può diventare, come dire, più lavoro e questo in qualche modo può ammazzare la passione, but you never stopped to be a rock photographer. I mean, you were not really bored, just a little bit, I think.
Yeah, maybe. There's a great English word which is jaded, you know, where you're just a bit worn out by it all. But no, I mean, my favourite thing is shooting live shows. Absolutely love it, still to this day. I love it so much.
How much Freddie will surprise you? I mean, you saw him play so many times. There was a little bit of surprise each night, or not? Gli ho chiesto, avendolo fotografato e seguito così tanto tempo, c'era qualcosa ancora che Freddie Mercury riusciva a fargli che lo sorprendeva, che non aveva visto?
Well, when I saw Queen in the early days, they were a very heavy rock band. So it's only later on they started to write more commercial songs, and then they became a bit more poppy. I mean, they were still heavy, but they were a very heavy rock band. It was mainly male audience. And the lighting in early days wasn't great, so a lot of the time it was almost darkness, there wasn't much going on. Then when they built up the huge light shows, that was a problem again, because it looked really good, but all those lights were pointing towards me, so it meant that you couldn't do anything automatically on the camera, you had to do everything manually to make up for those lights. But he didn't really do anything that surprised me. But it's just that there were certain things he might have only done once or twice. So there are various pictures in there. Some of those things only happened once that I saw. So there were others. And also he moved really quickly. And he just suddenly turned around. And you knew it was a great shot, but whether you got it or not was another thing. And also he ran quite a lot. And it made it difficult to photograph him. It was quite hard work, especially before the cameras became digital, and now they'll shoot at any light and you can take thousands of pictures. It's all, you know, completely different. Whereas I had 36 pictures in my camera, you know, a roll of film, and then I had to decide whether the film was daylight or you couldn't shoot in any sort of darkness at all. So it made it quite difficult, and also you could only carry a certain amount of film. So you were limited, it was like ammunition, you only had a certain amount with you. So you had to pace yourself. So it's those technical issues that really made it difficult, as opposed to the way he behaved. But the good thing was, because he was such an amazing performer, that did make it interesting for me. And so I was having fun just trying to capture it all. And there's a picture in there of him sticking his tongue out at the end of the piano. And then it became a bit like that. And there's another picture which I think is there, which he's at the front of the stage. He was very Freddie Mercury on stage, and then just kind of Fred off stage when he was shyer. And then he turned round and looked at me on stage and smiled the smile of Fred. And it was so sweet, because he was such a different, confident person on stage, almost arrogant. Whereas off stage he was shy, kind of arrogant, but very funny. So he was more like a comedian, really.
Allora dice, sorpreso no, perché bene o male quello che faceva era abbastanza chiaro, però ogni volta, ogni sera c'erano un paio di momenti in cui faceva cose non attese, anche perché lui camminava un sacco da una parte all'altra del palco, chiaramente si muoveva molto, quindi obiettivamente tenere d'occhio tutto quello che poteva fare non era facilissimo, soprattutto quando le camere non erano quelle automatiche di oggi, e quindi gli show della prima parte della loro carriera erano poco illuminati, quindi avevi un problema di luce, gli show della seconda parte della carriera erano molto illuminati, ma la luce puntava chiaramente contro le sue macchine fotografiche, quindi i tipi di difficoltà cambiavano, ma c'era sempre qualche difficoltà nello scattare. Però la cosa divertente, ha detto, era seguire lui come performer, perché comunque ogni tanto qualcosa accadeva e tu capivi che quello era uno scatto fantastico. Certo, se riuscivi a farlo o meno è un altro conto, però per male vedevi qual era il momento giusto. E soprattutto c'erano anche le due personalità di Freddie Mercury. Quello che sul palco poteva sembrare arrogante, sicuro, addirittura, come dire, molto oltre la sua normale personalità, era poi Fred invece con gli amici, molto più timido, molto più semplice, molto divertente, e ha detto: l'immagine che ho è quella di lui che si gira verso di me sul palco e mi fa un sorriso da Fred, non da Freddie Mercury. Quindi cogliere questi momenti, questi attimi, era quello che rendeva chiaramente il lavoro sempre diverso e sempre interessante durante gli anni. How was the last part of the work you did with the Queen? When you ended your work with them? With the last tour?
Yeah, at the end of that tour, yeah. Because I would always go away for 6 months or 8 months. So that tour was in the summer of '86. At the beginning of '87, I went on tour with David Bowie for the whole year. So it was, rehearsals, dress rehearsals, stage rehearsals, the tour. So I would only sometimes shoot one band in 1 year. So, and then they weren't touring, but no one knew why. And of course, Freddie was ill, so that changed. Yeah, so it just I sort of went on from one band to another, to another, to another, and if they toured again, then I'd come back again, but of course they didn't, so that was that really. And it was only 4 or 5 years later that he died, so...
Ha detto, quindi ha seguito l'ultimo tour dei Queen, non sapeva chiaramente come nessuno che la condizione fosse diventata così difficile, quindi lui peraltro seguiva anche altri tour contemporaneamente, quindi in un modo o nell'altro cercava di essere dietro questa situazione, ma era una situazione particolare perché loro volevano per forza fare quest'ultimo tour sapendo che, al contrario di noi, che Freddie era malato e quindi che probabilmente non sarebbero riusciti a fare un ulteriore tour. So, to end this wonderful chat with you, what's the main thing, the thing that you love most in your work? Qual è la cosa che ami di più del tuo lavoro?
It was nice meeting ladies all over the world. Well, that was nice. Travelling I just love. I really love it so much. And so most of the places that I visited for the first time were when I was on tour, and then I could go back another time. So that was, and some of the things we did on the tour. So we would go to Mission Control at NASA, and we'd go on the shooting range at the FBI, and David Bowie would rent the presidential yacht for, so it was just, we did all these amazing things. So it's difficult to know, and also I toured with my heroes, really. They were the people that I thought were amazing. They were these icons, and they were untouchable to me. I mean, my parents came from Ireland, immigrants, and I knew no one. And I didn't go to college because I wanted to go to art college, and my parents didn't want me to go. They wanted me to get a job in an office in the city of London. But the nearest art college to my school was where Freddie Mercury went. So, which, of course, but no one, the Queen didn't exist at that point, so of course no one knew that. To have then lived that life was fantastic, because the life itself was fun. The private jets and the police escorts, and, the 5-star hotels and everything. It is great fun. Although it can be boring after a while, but it is great fun to do. So I was very lucky that I experienced that life at all. So that's really what I look back at. And then created all these memories as well, which is why I did it in the first place. The reason I did it was to create those memories. And there are bands that don't appreciate that. And they go off and they do a tour. It's going to be their biggest ever tour. And they don't take a photographer, and then it isn't documented. And I wanted to photograph Prince when he did 21 nights at the O2 in London. And I thought, this is great. I can go on tour, but stay in London, stay at home. So he couldn't make his mind up, and he didn't know what to do. And in the end, He didn't have any photography. He asked the audience not to take any pictures. So it went undocumented. So I could have done a rather nice could have done a rather nice Prince book and it would be great to have 21 shows from one venue. It would have been, but some people just, I don't know, he's strange anyway, but a lot of people just can't see that their life should really be documented, and because that's their history, and then later on they regret it sometimes.
Allora, partiamo dalla fine, ha detto che la cosa, il vero motivo per cui ha fatto tutto questo è perché può creare della memoria che poi rimane nel tempo, di eventi, di cose, di emozioni. Poi in realtà, lo dico da fan, per noi di una certa età in particolare, le fotografie ci hanno raccontato la musica, anche quella che non riusciamo a vedere o a incontrare perché viviamo magari appunto come noi in Italia, quindi lontano dal grande flusso del rock and roll. Ma questo, ho detto chiaramente, era la cosa più importante, e non è successa sempre, perché molti artisti non pensano di dover lasciare memoria di quello che hanno fatto, e quindi alcuni tour importanti non hanno avuto fotografi e quindi non sono stati poi memorizzati e ricordati. Fa l'esempio di Prince, quando ha fatto 29 show a Londra consecutivi, ha detto un'esperienza perfetta, perché significa andare in tour senza mai muoversi dalla città e ogni giorno seguire una cosa diversa. Ma Prince era strano, non voleva fotografie, quindi quel clamoroso evento, veramente clamoroso, lo trovate raccontato ovunque come una delle cose più fighe che Prince abbia fatto nella sua vita, non è documentato. Lui ha detto che ne avrebbe fatto volentieri un libro, era una roba, 21 concerti raccontati uno dopo l'altro. Ma insomma, ha detto però ci sono tante anche cose divertenti, incontrare molte ragazze, conoscere gli eroi della sua adolescenza. Lui arriva da una famiglia irlandese che gli voleva trovare un lavoro nella City, mentre lui voleva andare al college, all'Art College, peraltro ci è riuscito ad andare, era lo stesso dove andò Freddie Mercury, ma anche molti altri artisti all'Art College. Insomma, dice, alla fine sono stato certamente fortunato di poter fare questa bellissima vita, gli alberghi a 5 stelle, i party privati, andare in dei luoghi dove la gente normalmente non entra, come la sala del controllo missione della NASA, oppure con David Bowie sullo yacht presidenziale, quindi delle cose anche decisamente particolari o diverse. Però ho detto, alla fine una cosa che contava di più è il creare della memoria che poi può essere trasmessa e condivisa con gli altri. So it was a big pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Grazie a Denis O'Regan.
Radio Medimex.